Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon podcast. This week, to sort of acknowledge the launch of my new strength and conditioning course, I am looking at the sort of subject of strength training within race season. Because you could be forgiven for thinking, well, why are you releasing a course on strength and conditioning in May? I mean, isn't that something we do in the off season? So I wanted to take the time to have a look at this and understand why it is that I'm releasing it now, as well as the benefits of keeping a well-rounded strength program throughout the year and what that can look like as it progresses throughout the year. Now, I know this is going to be difficult, especially if it's your first season of triathlon. If you try to imagine October time, where it is the end of the triathlon season for most people in the Northern Hemisphere, we get maybe into November, definitely into December in the vast majority of the Northern Hemisphere at least. And the season's wound down, you've been training relentlessly for months on end, and you just need a little bit of a break, okay, to make sure that you're fresh and you're motivated going into the next season. You may be at the point where you don't even really want to look at your bike right now. You just need some time away from things, and you think, you know what, I'm going to do some strength work. So I've heard about the benefits of it, okay? Brilliant idea, very much recommend it. And what I recommend people start out with is they start out with what we call an anatomical adaptation phase, which is where we're lifting light weights for sort of 10 to 12 reps for the most part. That's assuming it's not bodyweight exercises such as pull-ups, asking somebody to grind out 10 pull-ups, not really an entry-level exercise. However, if we're looking at most sort of squats, deadlifts, exercises like that, generally around the 10 to 12 rep range is what we'd be looking at, because we are either teaching our body the right patterns of movement or we're reminding our body the right patterns for the movement. And the length of this phase will depend on a few factors, not least really, which is sort of how experienced somebody is in a gym. If somebody has never really been in a gym before, but they go, look, I want to do this strength work, I understand the importance of it, then we're going to have a relatively long phase of this because we are teaching our body new lifts. If we're starting off with, say, a bodyweight good morning, progressing to a kettlebell deadlift, staying with that for a few months, then maybe progressing to a dumbbell deadlift, then up to a barbell deadlift, okay? This is a real journey that we're going on, where we're learning movements and we're developing strength. And it's not something we can afford to rush. However, if somebody is very experienced in the gym, if they were a power lifter or maybe a bodybuilder before they started triathlon, then this phase might not be nearly as long because they're already familiar with the movements and we're just getting the muscles ready to it more than sort of the nervous system and teaching the technique. The next phase depends entirely on how much time we have between the end of the anatomical adaptation phase and the start of the racing season, or more specifically, I guess, their A race. So, if somebody has only got around about sort of 12 weeks between the end of the anatomical adaptation phase and their race, or maybe even 16 weeks in some cases, okay, we cannot afford to spend a bunch of time focusing on strength work. However, if somebody still has about sort of 5 or 6 months to go until their A race, what I'll normally recommend athletes do is they do a max strength block. Now, the issue with lifting for 10 or 12 reps is that while it is still a way to build strength, and it is important to teach our body the correct technique, if we really want to level up our racing, if we really want to be racing faster, we need to be focusing on lifting a heavy weight for lower reps. If I am doing light squats, so if I'm using some dumbbells or light barbell on my back and I'm doing lots of sets of 12 reps for this, how different is that from riding up a steep hill on my bike? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's different, but it is still, a relatively light load going through the legs, but repeated a number of times. If I were to get a really heavy barbell and stick it on my back and squat for 4 reps, that is something entirely different to what is that we will be experiencing in our swimming, cycling, or running training, okay? And this is really where the gold comes in for strength training. This is where you really get the benefits from the strength work, is from this maximum strength block. Now, if someone is planning to do a max strength block, which I would very much encourage them to, probably not right now because we're coming to race season, but maybe if you're in the southern hemisphere, this is something you might want to be thinking about before too long. If you are looking to do this max strength block, you need to be careful. If you have done if you got used to doing 12 reps with 50 kilos on a squat bar, a barbell I should say, if you then go, right, max strength, I'm going to stick 100 kilos on this bar, look, you're going to do yourself a mischief. You're going to get injured. You're going to hurt yourself. You still need to spend the first week or two of a max strength block building up the weight relatively slowly. So if we use the example, okay, if I've been squatting 50 kilos each week reliably for 3 sets of 12 reps, and it's challenging, but it's not killing me, then I will go, okay, max strength block, I'm going to do 4 sets. So the first set, I'm going to stick 60 kilos on. I know I can definitely handle 60 kilos. I'm going to do my 4 reps, because that's how many reps is on my plan. 4 reps with 60 kilos. Yeah, that felt fine. Do I go 65 or do I go 70? Let's go with 65, because, 5 kilos is 5 kilos. And you do that for the second set. Now I can handle 70. Do 70 for the third set. Move up to 75. That's really starting to get challenging now. I think I'll stick with 70. And you can use this as a slow way to build up the weight that you're using, not just with each week, as we might do if we are in the anatomical adaptation phase and think, I try squatting 60 kilos this week. You're building up slowly. With each set, you're questioning, could I add just a little bit more weight, even if it's only another 2.5 kilos? And you're progressing this in a careful, considerate manner. So the 2 main benefits of this maximum strength work. Firstly, is that we're getting a lot stronger, okay? And that affects our performance in a multitude of ways. The second benefit of lifting this heavy is that it is waking up our nervous system, okay? The nervous system interacts with the muscles through a series of what we call motor units. So if we use our quadriceps, the muscles at the front of our thighs as an example, let's say for the sake of argument that we have 100 motor units in those muscles. Again, I'm just picking a random number out of the air there. It may be that if you only ever do swimming, cycling and running and lift light weights, you might be using kind of 50 to 60 of those, because the body doesn't need to use any more than that. Then when you start really doing a heavy squat, suddenly the body starts finding these additional motor units that haven't really been needed to be used for a while. They go, okay, let's switch these on, let's get these working. And if you ever woken up the day after any kind of workout and thought, wow, I didn't even know I had muscles there, that is the result of your body being put under some sort of stress and strain that it's not been used to for some time, and it's having to use muscles in a way that it hasn't for a long time. And that is really good as athletes, because we now have simply more muscle fibers at our disposal when we're swimming and cycling and running, even at lower intensity. So it helps regulate our nervous system and our muscular system, known as the neuromuscular system, between the two of them. And it helps us become more efficient and just use more of what our body has when we're doing our training. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of the first 2 phases of strength training. What we're here to talk about is what happens after you've finished your maximum strength block and you start moving much closer into race season. Now, a lot of people's instincts is, I'm going to stop. I'm coming out of off-season now. I'm getting to the race season. I've had some good months in the gym building up strength. You know what? I'm going to cancel my gym membership and I'm going to go and I'm going to focus on swimming, cycling and running. Can you imagine if you're chatting to someone, you're out on a run with them, and they go, yeah, I think that I finished with my cycle training for the year. I'm just going to park my bike up, leave it in the house, focus on my running and my swimming, and just get the bike out on race day. You're looking like they had 3 heads, right? You go, are you serious? You know, I appreciate that you've done some good bike training over the winter, but you're just going to stop? And that's sort of the metaphor. Imagine if somebody added 50 watts to their FTP and went, okay, well, I'm done with cycle training. I'm going to focus on other things now. I mean, that's not going to yield results, is it? And so abandoning your strength training as you come into season, it's a huge own goal. You really are shooting yourself in the foot there. Now, using the cycling example, if somebody did manage to add 50 watts to their FTP over a winter, I mean, that is an enormous block of training. And that's not realistic expectation, guys. That's an exaggeration. A lot of people would be lucky to see an FTP increase of 10% over a whole season. But if somebody's a very new cyclist and they see this huge increase, and they go, right, okay, I'm going to focus on other areas of my training. I've been neglecting my swimming and my running. Okay, I understand that you've seen some great gains on the bike. And, you want to go, look, I'm going to acknowledge this and maybe focus on the areas that I'm weaker on. But you still would want to keep at least one, ideally 2 bike sessions in a week, depending on how often you train. If you only train once a day, so sort of 6 days a week, then maybe one sort of long ride a week would do it, just to maintain the goals that you had. You would not step away from the bike completely. Just because you're putting your focus elsewhere doesn't not mean that you abandon this area of your training. And the same should go for strength training. It may be that we've been in the gym 2, maybe even 3 times a week over the off season. Could be done 2 gym sessions and 1 home strength session, or you've gone to sort of Pilates sessions, yoga. All of these are really going to help develop our body and our overall athleticism. You made some great decisions, but if you then walk away and you abandon them over the summer, that's not going to help. So what we need to do instead is walk it back. If we are a very serious Ironman athlete, and this is the year that we're going to qualify for Kona, then you need to go, all right, I'm going to take these 3 gym sessions I'd be doing a week, and I'm going to tone it down to 2 gym sessions a week. Because I appreciate that it's just not the same priority as it was the strength work. It was super important in the off season. It was a great chance for us to improve our performance while having a bit of a mental break from all the time spent on the bike, in the pool, and on our feet. However, let's face it, race season is coming up. I've got some big races this year, and I need to make sure that I am race fit, and so I need to spend less time in the gym. Completely sensible. I would always support that. Or alternatively, it could be that somebody has only spent 2 days a week in the gym, which again is I'd be pleased as punch if somebody spent 2 days a week in the gym over winter, and they go, look, we're approaching race season, we need to tone it down to 1. Some people will want to really maintain that gym work, and even as they go into race season. Some people to whom, strength, maybe sort of muscle size is really important to them, and they want to keep this up. And as long as it's not really having an interference effect with our triathlon training, I don't have a huge issue with it. I'll always make sure they understand the effect that it could have on their triathlon training. But if it's a sacrifice they're willing to make, if they're not super fussed about their time, I'm not going to ban them from using the gym. If anything, that would only encourage them to go and do it without telling me. So we need to dial back our strength sessions, but we shouldn't be abandoning them completely. So if we are dialing our sessions back, what should these sessions look like? What's going to change in our training? Well, if we are doing a max strength block, if we are lifting heavy, we've got deadlifts, bent over rows, squats, bench press, whatever exercise it is that we are using a bunch of weight on and that we're looking to really progress our strength with, that is going to have a real notable impact on our ability to do much else during that session. During the max strength block, I'll normally give people sort of a warm-up mobility exercise to get things moving. And then we jump into our main set, and we normally do, because you're going to have around about sort of 3-minute rests between these max strength blocks to sort of allow yourself to fully recharge. We're going to take the time to go, okay, let's say we're going to do like 4 main lifts in our main set, and then probably sort of a core exercise at the end. This means that we don't have time to do single leg work, to do plyometrics, to do different variations, okay? These are what we should be doing within race season, within what I call a strength maintenance phase. So the first thing I wanted to examine in a bit more detail is the idea of single leg work. So if I do a big deadlift, okay, that is going to do wonders for my posterior chain, for my glutes, for my hamstrings, these muscles that are really important for us to target as triathletes if we want to avoid injury. However, I'm not just looking simply to prevent injury with my strength training. I'm also looking to swim, cycle and run faster. So by incorporating some single leg Romanian deadlifts within my program, which are a popular single leg exercise, I am asking each leg to fire up those muscles individually. If my left leg were sort of 10%, let's say 10% weaker than my right leg, then when I'm doing the lift with both legs, the right leg is going to be working harder, the left leg isn't going to be firing up as much. And a 10% strength deficit is really quite large. But by doing single leg variations, okay, I can train those single limbs and I can bring them both up to scratch. Not only this, but let's think about running as a movement. Now, if you really break it down, it's a series of single-legged hops. You are simply moving from one leg to the other, to the other, to the other. We're not doing any bilateral, so using both limbs. We're not doing any bilateral movements in triathlon that I'm aware of. Maybe unless somebody's diving into the water. Every movement that we make within the entire sport is alternating action between left and right. And by using these single leg movements, we increase stability, we improve balance, we are simply becoming more efficient at recruiting all of the muscles and everything required from that single limb. And the same goes for single leg squats, Bulgarian split squats, regular split squats, single arm rows. These are all individual exercises that we should be including within race season if we want to actually sort of reach our potential and make sure that all of the strength that we've built up over winter we can transform into speed on the race course a lot easier. The next concept is that of power. Now, I'm not talking about cycling power here, okay, the measurement that we use. I'm talking about the ability to generate force in a rapid fashion. So I want you to think about two different athletes here. On the one hand, you have a javelin thrower. On the other hand, you have a strongman, somebody who is entering World's Strongest Man. Now, the athlete who is training for World's Strongest Man is going to be stronger than the javelin thrower. If you were to get them into the weight room and do a back-to-back test of strength, okay, unsurprisingly, the World's Strongest Man competitor will be stronger than the javelin thrower. But who do you think is going to be able to generate force faster? Look at the exercises that are used in World's Strongest Man. So you have sort of the truck pull, you have the Atlas stones, these kinds of tests of strength, which are done in a relatively speaking, slow manner, as opposed to a javelin thrower who executes sort of a bit of a series of running hops and then in a very explosive fashion launches this javelin through the air. Now, who do you think is going to be able to throw that javelin further? The brute strength that World's Strongest Man athlete has is nothing without the ability to generate force quickly. When you look at the size of these guys who are strongmen athletes, there is no way that they would make, with all the technique in the world, there is no way they would make a good javelin thrower. Because they are just too big, bulky, and slow for that sport. And there's a reason for that. It's because for strongman, they need to be big and bulky, and with that, becomes being slow. So what the javelin athlete has that the strongman athlete doesn't is the ability to generate power. That is to be able to generate force in an explosive fashion. And this is something that a huge amount of triathletes are sorely lacking in. Especially when we look at the longer distance, when we look at 70.3, when we look at Ironman. We have people who can go out and they can grind out a 3-4 hour zone 2 ride on the bike, which is really important, I should add out. As triathletes, I mean, that's what our racing looks like. But if you ask them to make any kind of explosive movement, to do any kind of sprints or jumps or throws or anything like that, they'd be completely useless. Yes, they have a really strong aerobic system, but their ability to generate power in a fast, explosive way is sorely lacking. Now, those at the very top end of the sport, this doesn't apply to. Look at the way that they run. Look at the power with which they push off of on the ground as they run. They've clearly been doing all sorts of strength training, drills, jumps, and that to kind of help improve the elasticity in their legs, to improve their leg spring stiffness, to work on the stretch shortening cycle. All of these benefits of doing this explosive training, I bet a lot of them are going to have been doing box jumps and hops and including these in their training. Whereas your age grouper, who, okay, they can do a really long ride, no problem, but you get them on the run and their feet are barely picking up from the floor and they go, oh, I'm no good at running. Well, you're no good at running because you have no ability to generate power, to generate force. You are just plodding along in what, for all intents and purposes, looks a little bit like a fast walk. The way that you bring yourself out of this run speed rut, okay, is through improving your body's ability to generate power. And race season, I cannot say this clearly enough, race season is the time to work on this. If you spend a lot of time developing power in the anatomical adaptation phase, you will lose that by the time that race season comes along, especially if you do a max strength block. Okay, there will be bits of sort of box jumps and some of this basic explosive work in the anatomical adaptation phase, just to help get our bodies ready, wake up those muscles. However, it's in race season that this becomes really important. If you used to do your pogo jumps, if you used to do your med ball slams, all of these movements where we are moving quickly, they are critical if we want to actually really step up our performance. And you know what? There are a lot of people for whom I'd say, look, this is the single most important thing to improve your triathlon performance, is to focus on the ability to generate power. You watch them swim and they're just so slow and laboured, and they're looking at people in the other lanes and going, why can't I ride like them? And on the bike, they're perfectly strong because they've got decent muscles, they've got a decent aerobic system, they can ride along chatting, get to a hill, oh, I'll see you later, guys. And they just grind up that hill. And as I said earlier, on the run, they just plod along. And yeah, you know what? If that's all they really want to do, I'm not going to be the one to take that away from them. But if they actually want to get faster on the run and not just talk about how they need to improve that running, okay, they need to, of course, do intervals that they may be a little bit allergic to. But this explosive work in the gym is really going to supercharge them. So we've looked at single leg strength, and we've also looked at force development, power training. These are two really important skills that we develop in the strength room within race season. However, it's not simply just down to that. It's also down to maintaining what it is that we developed in the off-season. Now, I'll be honest, there is no way a triathlete can spend 2 days in the gym in the off-season doing all this max strength work, have a series of racing, and still be as strong as they were at the start of the race season by the end of the season. We generally lose strength along the way. And you know what? That's not ideal, but what are we really going to do about that? At the end of the day, we're doing strength training to support our triathlon racing. If we focus too much on our strength training, then our racing is going to suffer. So we need to go, look, let's just take a step back with our strength training over the summer and accept that we're going to be losing a bit of strength over the season. However, we want to do what we can to minimise the amount of strength that we lose. Now, if we are to minimise the amount of strength that we lose throughout the season, we still have to integrate some heavy lifting. And we have to do this in quite a careful, mindful way. We can't be very slapdash about it, but we need to include a little bit. So what I would generally do is with athletes of mine, and this is something I started doing in recent years, something I didn't always do because of sort of fear of getting it wrong, as it were. But now I've actually completed more in the way of strength and conditioning qualifications. I've started to realise that for most people, especially if we have done a maximum strength block in the winter, we need to include a heavy lift each week. It may only be one. And generally, it will be a big compound lift, like a lunge, like a squat, like a deadlift, like the bench press, or bent over row, or pull up, okay? It's a really big, high value exercise, but we are still fitting this heavy lifting in, doing lots of other sort of light lifting, single leg work, plyometrics, power development work within the session, but also squeezing in one heavy lift just to remind our body of how it works and everything that we trained for. Generally speaking, I believe that most strength sessions should be around about 45 minutes. It doesn't matter much if they're half an hour or an hour, but we don't want to be spending too much time in the gym. And considering the amount of muscle groups that we have to hit, so we need to nail our calves, hamstrings, also very important, quads, useful, glutes help us prevent running injuries, our core, everybody wants to include some kind of core exercise, not only bracing exercises that help target our rectus abdominis, but also anti-rotation exercise that target our obliques. We're also looking to work on our shoulders for the swim, not just our deltoids, but the rotator cuff as well, our chest and our back, and we haven't even got onto our upper arms and the lower arms at this point. So you have to take a step back and you have to think, well, that's a huge amount of ground to cover if we're only doing 1 or 2 sessions a week. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And as a result, in race season, we tend to rotate the exercises a lot more than we would at other times. If we're in the anatomical adaptation phase and we know that we're going to do a max strength block focused on deadlift, squat, bench press, and bent over row, for example, then in the anatomical adaptation phase, we are going to be focusing on those lifts to get ourselves ready for the max strength phase. And when we are in race season, this is our chance to go, okay, let's target the rotator cuff. Let's do a little bit of work on wrist extension. Let's focus on some more unusual lifts, areas of the body that are a bit more relevant to performance and injury prevention within season than simply sort of getting ready for these big compound lifts. Race season is also a fantastic time to work on your mobility. I mean, there's never a bad time to work on your mobility. But as we are training hard, if we are putting in these long sessions, these hard sessions, these intense sessions, our muscles are going to get tight. And if we are not working on these with mobility exercises and with stretching to increase the flexibility, we're going to get tighter. We are going to have a limited range of motion, and that is going to affect our form. Now, picture a track runner running like a gazelle, really long strides, really strong muscles. They have achieved that with a lot of mobility work by staying flexible and staying strong. You have that little triangle there: strength, mobility, flexibility. Unless you have all 3 of those, you are going to find yourself in a certain level of trouble. Now, I will caution this by saying that, endurance athletes can be too flexible. I know it's the kind of thing you may think is hard to believe, but if your muscles are really relaxed, if they are really flexible, that reduces their ability to be able to hold momentum and force and to keep you nice and stable, for us to have that leg spring stiffness in our legs. We don't want to be so flexible that our legs have all of the structural integrity of an overcooked noodle. However, most triathletes are so tight in the first place, it's extraordinarily unlikely they're ever going to come close to achieving this state. And it's not an excuse to skimp on the flexibility work. However, I'm just pointing out that unless we focus on all three parts of this triangle with a even-handed approach, we are going to end up just compromising our ability. So I hope this has given you an appreciation of just how much goes into a sort of a good strength program and how many elements there are to juggle simultaneously. Now, again, if you are just starting your strength journey now, if we are sort of in spring and you're going, you know what, I want to do triathlon, I want to get stronger, or it could be that you're waking up. It could be that you're one of these athletes, you don't do anything between the months of sort of October and April, and it's only when we get into spring that you start your training again. It may be going, look, this year I want to include strength work. In which case, disregard everything regarding max strength, okay, and simply focus on lifting lighter weights at higher reps. Now, I know I've already said this isn't the most efficient way to lift, but for a beginner, especially in race season, we do not want to get to the point where you're feeling significantly sore for days after your strength workout. If you are feeling sore after your strength workout in race season, you're doing something wrong. Okay, it's okay if you feel a bit of a light burn when you wake up the next day that loosens itself off as you get into your training. But what we can't afford to do is we can't afford to go to the gym, lift too heavy, lift too hard, do lifts that we're not used to, and do too many of them, and then find ourselves unable to run for sort of 4 or 5 days afterwards. That is disastrous for race season, and that is not going to help us to race faster. Instead, we want to focus on building up slowly, building it up nice and sustainably. As triathletes, we do have a little bit of an all or nothing approach to these things quite often, and that can get ourselves into real trouble if we take that into the weight room. If we are used to doing lots of swimming, lots of running, lots of cycling, and we're going, right, I like to go hard in all my sessions, I like to push myself, that's great. But if you then go into the gym and you're using muscles that you haven't really used before and you're really giving them a pounding, you are going to regret that in the days that come afterwards. So with my introduction to strength and conditioning course, I mean, some of the easy workouts, it should only take you about 5 or 10 minutes, and they only use body weight because we're building up slowly. And throughout the 12-week training plans, it progressively gets more challenging until the end, where after 12 weeks, you're actually performing a decent level of strength work, but hopefully you'll be suffering with minimal soreness because we brought it up in a really slow, gentle and controlled way. Then at the end of the race season, that's when you can start thinking about max strength work. I hope you found that useful and interesting. I'm going to leave a link to my Introduction to Strength and Conditioning program down in the show notes, so hop in there, grab yourself a copy. It can be performed at any time of year, and you start your strength and conditioning journey today. Other than that, thank you very much for your company. Good luck with your week of training ahead, and I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.